If you're a man between 50 and 64, there's a chemical in your blood right now, found in over 95% of the people it was measured in, that's linked to your body aging faster at the cellular level than your birth certificate says it should. A study published this year in the journal Frontiers in Aging looked at exactly this. Researchers took blood samples originally collected from U.S. adults, ran them through 12 different DNA-based aging clocks, and found that one specific PFAS chemical, PFNA, was tied to faster epigenetic aging, specifically in men, and specifically in people between 50 and 64. I'm a toxicologist. I've spent 15 years working on this exact chemical class. Today, I'm walking you through exactly what this study found, what it didn't find, because there's an important nuance the headlines missed, and the handful of things that actually reduce your exposure. Here's what most people think biological aging means: genetics, diet, exercise, all real factors. But over the last decade, researchers built something new: epigenetic clocks. Instead of counting birthdays, they measure chemical tags on your DNA called methylation marks. Tags that shift in predictable patterns as cells age. There are now more than a dozen of these clocks, each built differently. Some estimate your general biological age, some are tuned specifically to predict mortality risk. Two of the most cited are called Grimage and Grimage 2, built specifically to predict how much lifespan and health span someone has left based on their DNA. This matters because biological age tracks with real outcomes, heart disease, cognitive decline, mortality, better than the number of birthdays you've had. And PFAS are some of the most persistent chemicals human cells are ever exposed to. The carbon-fluorine bond at their core is one of the strongest bonds in organic chemistry. Serum half-lives for some of these compounds run into multiple years, meaning once it's in you, it doesn't just pass through in days. It's in non-stick cookware, food packaging, water-resistant fabrics, firefighting foam residue, and groundwater near military bases and airports. That's the background. Now, here's exactly what the study found, and I'm going to be precise because precision here is the entire point. Researchers analyzed data from 326 U.S. adults aged 50 and older using blood samples from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. They measured 11 PFAS compounds and ran 12 different DNA methylation aging algorithms on each person. Two compounds stood out enough to reach statistical significance: PFNA, detected in 95.4% of participants, and a compound the study calls PFSA, detected in 95.7% of DAS, which, to avoid confusion with sulfonic acids generally, is really perfluoroctane sulfonamide, a related but distinct PFAS. Here's the specific verified finding. PFNA was significantly associated with two mortality-focused clocks, Grimage and its updated version, Grimage 2, and this association was substantially stronger in men than in women and stronger in the 50 to 64 age group than in people 65 and older. In men specifically, higher PFNA was also linked to faster aging on a third clock, the original Horvath clock. In women, none of these associations were statistically significant at all. The second compound, PFSA, told a different story. And this is where a lot of the online coverage got sloppy. PFSA wasn't linked to the same mortality clocks. It was linked to a completely different one, short lineage, which is tied more to metabolic and lipid-related aging. And that association was actually stronger in adults 65 and older, not in the 50 to 64 group. If you saw a headline lumping both chemicals into one chemicals age you faster in midlife claim, that headline blurred two genuinely different findings together. Now here's the part that separates a credible video from clickbait, and it's the part I almost never see mentioned. When you test 12 different aging clocks against multiple chemicals, you have to correct for the fact that some significant results will show up by chance alone. Statisticians call this a false discovery rate, or FDR, correction. The researchers ran that correction. After it, PFNA's linked to Grimage, the strongest single finding, and held up. But the links to Grimage 2 and to a pace of aging measure called Dunedin POAM got weaker and dropped below the standard significance threshold. The study authors themselves described their results as, quote, hypothesis generating, meaning this is strong enough to justify more research, not strong enough to call it settled science. I'm telling you this because the previous videos where I've given you a straight, sometimes unflattering carve-out are the reason you can trust what I'm telling you now. A lot of channels in this space would have led with chemicals prove aging and skipped this part entirely. Here's why I still think this is worth 4 minutes of your time despite that caveat. This isn't an isolated result. The same research team notes that a separate independent group, Khodasevich and colleagues, publishing in 2025, they looked at the exact same underlying 1999 to 2000 blood samples and also found sex-specific PFAS epigenetic aging associations, though tied to slightly different specific clocks. Two separate analyses, converging on the same core idea, PFAS exposure and epigenetic aging are connected, and the effect isn't uniform across sexes. There's also a genuinely important limitation baked into the data itself, and I want to flag it clearly. These blood samples were collected in 1999 and 2000. That's exposure from a quarter century ago, before several PFAS phase-outs took effect. This tells us about historical exposure and its long-term biological fingerprint. It doesn't necessarily reflect what today's blood levels look like, though PFAS persistence means many of these compounds are still detectable in people today. Looks like a definitive forever chemicals age you headline. Reads like a genuinely interesting, statistically honest, hypothesis-generating signal from decades-old blood samples, which is a real finding, just a more careful one than the coverage suggested. Stop for a second, because here's the bigger pattern underneath the statistics. PFAS were engineered specifically to never break down. That permanence was the entire selling point, decades before anyone was measuring epigenetic clocks. In early 2024, the FDA completed a voluntary phase-out. The grease-proofing PFAS used on paper food packaging, fast food wrappers, microwave popcorn bags, takeout containers are no longer sold into the U.S. market. And by January 2025, the agency formally revoked the 35 authorizations tied to them. That actually closes what the FDA itself calls the single biggest dietary source of authorized PFAS. But authorized food contact uses is one narrow lane. It doesn't touch the roughly 10,000 PFAS across cookware coatings, textiles, and industrial uses, and it does nothing about PFAS that show up as contaminants rather than intentional ingredients. In Europe, the regulatory picture has moved further than most people realize. In March 2026, ECHA's Risk Assessment Committee formally adopted its opinion supporting a broad EU-wide restriction on PFAS as a chemical class, not compound by compound. The Committee for Socioeconomic Analysis followed with a draft opinion the same month, largely agreeing, with only narrow time-limited exemptions for things like protective equipment. Public consultation on that draft closed in May 2026, and the committee is expected to finalize its opinion by the end of this year. Both opinions then go to the European Commission, which drafts the actual legal amendment, meaning, realistically, any EU-wide ban wouldn't take effect until around 2029 at the earliest. That timeline matters. This isn't settled law yet, anywhere. It's a serious advanced regulatory process, but not a done deal. So what's actually worth doing? Most PFAS advice online is either baseless anxiety or a product pitch. Here's what the exposure pathway science actually supports. Action 1. Your water is the single biggest lever. Drinking water is one of the most consistent, well-documented PFAS exposure routes. A filter specifically certified for PFAS reduction, TAR, not just any filter dry, is the highest leverage single change most people can make. Look for an explicit PFAS reduction certification, not just a general water quality claim. Action 2. Cookware, with a real caveat. Older PFOA-based nonstick coatings are largely phased out of the U.S. consumer market, but PFOA-free doesn't mean fluorine-free. Plenty of replacement coatings still use other fluorinated compounds. Cast iron or stainless steel sidestep the coating question entirely. Action 3. Grease-resistant fast food wrappers and microwave popcorn bags. These remain some of the more consistently PFAS-positive product categories in independent testing. This isn't about never eating out. It's a frequency question, not an absolute one. Action 4. Diet's actual role is more modest than the wellness influencer version. Nothing detoxes PFAS out of your body quickly. These compounds are persistent precisely because your body doesn't clear them fast. But a 2025 NHANES analysis found PFAS exposure tied to shorter telomeres, and that people with the lowest healthy diet scores were the most vulnerable to that combined effect. In other words, diet doesn't flush the chemicals out, but a better diet may blunt some of the cellular damage they're linked to. That's a meaningfully different, more honest claim than eat clean and flush the chemicals out. None of this is about achieving zero exposure, unrealistic given how ubiquitous these chemicals became over 80 years of use. It's about reducing your largest, most controllable sources. One well-designed study found a real but statistically modest and historically dated link between one specific forever chemical and faster biological aging, concentrated in men and in the 50 to 64 age range. The researchers were honest enough to call their own findings hypothesis-generating rather than proof. That kind of honesty is rare in this space, and it's exactly why the finding is worth taking seriously rather than either panicking over it or dismissing it. If you're in that age range or you just want to lower your household's overall exposure, check your water filter's actual PFAS certification, not just the marketing on the box. That's the single highest leverage change most people can make today. Tell me in the comments if you want a full breakdown of which water filter certifications are backed by real testing data versus marketing. This chemical family wasn't built to hurt you slowly, it was built to last forever. We're still finding out, one careful study at a time, what that actually costs. Read your labels, I'll read the studies. See you in the next one.